Welcome back to another edition of our Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stifel. On today's segment of Ask Dr. Steve, Dr. Steve Graef, owner of Mindurance, an organization for one-on-one mental health coaching to help coaches and athletes manage their stress and enhance their performance. Today's topic is both timely and important. It's on inclusivity and diversity in the workplace for several years. We know these have been like some buzzwords that have gone around here in Stark County, where CNA is located. Many of our area high schools have very diversified athletes, but many of our coaching staffs are still fairly Caucasian and lack some of that diversity. So we're going to take a look at that. And as usual, we will examine this topic from the perspective of our coaches, athletes, and parents. So Steve, before we kind of get started with the topic, you've mentioned in the past you've attended Lake local schools, you attended the Ohio State University. So how diversified were some of the coaching staffs you encountered at either of those schools?
Yeah, well, it's good to see you again and happy to be back on the podcast. Starting off, I think it's important to expand a bit of our definition of diversity too, right? I think a lot of our heads tend to go to probably gender and racial diversity. However, also keeping in mind sexual orientation, physical ability, age, region, nationality. So there's a lot, socioeconomic status. So there's a lot of elements wrapped up in diversity that we'll certainly try to speak to over the course of the podcast today. And yeah, we'll probably miss something. Diversity is not perfect. It can be a messy topic sometimes. It can be challenging to talk about. So hopefully we just give people a little bit of taste of some things that they can consider in their various roles, whether that be coach, parent, or athlete. So that's my little kind of initial informed consent. In terms of Lake, for a high school, you're often just going to be drawing from the local community. And Lake was a pretty homogenous community when it comes to racial diversity. In terms of socioeconomic status, there was a little bit more differences there. But for the most part, Lake was kind of a middle class, white, suburban area. And so you saw in the coaching staff and in the players a lot of that. So it was not very diverse from some of the more traditional ways of viewing diversity. When I went to Ohio State, that definitely changed. I mean, certainly you had much greater racial diversity because we were drawing from players in South Florida, California, Texas, in New York City, Chicago, the Carolinas. So you really drew not only kind of black athletes throughout the course of the country, but also white athletes that just had different upbringings that were less suburbia, less some rural individuals, rural Kentucky. So there was an opportunity to really exchange with other athletes. At the time, though, I'm 18, 19, 20 years old. You don't really appreciate the cornucopia of human beingness that's in front of you at that time. And you're still kind of stuck in some of your narrow minded ways of thinking and stereotypical ways of thinking. And certainly, myself as a 42-year-old is not very proud of probably some of my perspectives and ways of thinking when I was 18, 19, 20. But fortunately, I've developed some open mindedness over the course of my life and have really grown to appreciate other cultures, lean into other cultures for the depth and characteristics and the traits and the tapestry that is other cultures. Coaching staff did show more diversity than the Lake coaching staff did because I think, again, you're able to draw from beyond just the Columbus community. You're able to draw from individuals who are the best in their profession. And so you got to see certainly more racial diversity. There was socioeconomic diversity. I mean, an assistant in the weight room is not making the same amount of money as a tenured offensive coordinator that's been in and around the NCAA for a while. There was age diversity as well, some very new and younger coaches, whereas some individuals that have been coaching for 30 years in various roles. So a long kind of answer to the initial start, but that was back even before diversity was kind of as emphasized as it is now. So I think now, certainly at a collegiate level where you have a broader reach, it's and very importantly so, much more of a deliberate and intentional initiative and way of viewing how to round out a coaching staff in a very positive way.
Yeah, well, thank you for setting up the framework today. That's great. You even made me in these last few seconds kind of think of diversity in a whole different way. Um, and I think all of us can agree that our younger selves hopefully have matured and view these things a little bit differently. Um, I think we've mentioned in the past, you went to Lake, I went to Glen Oak. Glen Oak's always had a little bit more diversity in it. Again, just drawing on the makeup of the district. So I sometimes feel I was enlightened a little bit earlier or exposed to it a little bit earlier. But nevertheless, how your upbringing and all that also plays into effect. So, well, I'll be very interested to see how this conversation progresses today. And we're also going to set a little bit of framework on today's topic. So in the movie, remember the Titans set in the South a little bit, 1960s. Denzel Washington's character is the coach trying to integrate both a team and a coaching staff. That movie highlighted a lot of the challenges of those early practices, if you recall in the movie. But ultimately, in the end of the movie, the kids became friends, and that kind of carried on later in life. But the movie, based on a true story, has some of those challenges that still exist today, 50, 60 years later. And so, in your opinion, before we jump into breaking the topic out a little bit, why, after all these years, do you still think some of those challenges are around at not only the high school and the collegiate level, but we also have the professional level where some of those leagues have put in rules about interviewing and hiring people of diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, well, I'm no expert in a lot of this, but and I think that there is a continuum between the incredibly kind of open um, and individuals that want to embrace diversity in all forms and are very open to that. Um, there are individuals who may be kind of like pleasantly ignorant, like they just don't know what they kind of don't know. And then I think there's some individuals who kind of feel that diverse ways of being and thinking and representations is a kind of a threat to their belief system and what they feel makes the world go around and what is right. And again, that can also be based in either lack of education or personal experience or whatever it might be. So I think there's many, many variables that can continue into people kind of going down the same pathway and 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 not having these types of open cultural experiences that which they can kind of grow and develop from. Um, that it's great that there's additional conversation. I think by having additional conversation and education, it can broaden individuals who might be in that middle area. However, sometimes I think by having these conversations at times and more education, it can have people on the other end retreat even more. And again, I don't want to stick out a tongue or speak out of tongue because I think there's individuals who maybe have been traditionally somewhat closed-minded or not wanting to be open to other experiences or having other experiences maybe appear threatening to them. If those individuals would truly enter into some of these interactions with an open mind and an open heart, they might be surprised at what happens as a result. However, for a variety of reasons, they may not have those opportunities or they may not want to have those opportunities. So I think by forcing the hand or by having legislation or rules or policies that are more diversity centric and positive, it allows people the opportunity to have those experiences, hopefully positive experiences, and then are able to change some minds in a positive way as a result. But as you might imagine, this is a complex topic with a lot of variables, a lot of viewpoints, a lot of specifics and specializations within it. And there's some really kind of smart people that have dedicated their careers to discussing these things that are beyond that of Steve Graef. I'll preface that, but those are just some initial ways in which I tend to think about it.
Yeah, so it's sensitive. We know it's gonna maybe touch some people the wrong way, or hopefully it will just get them to open their minds and think a little more. So this segment will probably focus a little bit more on coaches and athletes rather than the parental side of things. Some of our topics favor one or the other. So we'll start off with the coaching side of things. Depending on where a coach grew up, where he or she went to school, and where they taught or coached in the past, the coach may or may not have played or coached on a team with diverse athletes. So what are some key points for coaches to keep in mind when working with kids of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds?
Well, you mentioned it, just the opportunity. I love the word enlightened you used earlier. It's just the opportunity to be enlightened about the individuals that you have an opportunity to coach. We view these things in a silo sometimes, like, oh, diversity, it's this whole other kind of sensitive, weird topic that's going to ruffle people the wrong way. But coaches do this in terms of physical ability and skill set the moment they step on to the field of play or the court. Like, they're kind of assessing what is this player good at? What makes them unique from a skill set perspective? What strengths do they bring that I can leverage in the X's and O's of this game? And what's interesting is human characteristics and qualities: age, sexual orientation, physical ability, racial background, culture, ethnicity, regional. These are all things that contribute to a human being's existence and performance on this earth. So I think from a coach's perspective is by getting to know your athletes, not just their physical abilities, but also what makes them a unique human being and how that can bring such positive things to the team. I think by changing the relationship that we have with, or even not even changing the relationship, but just going beyond the physical skill set and what makes this person in front of me a unique, positive, contributive human being. And if you do that, I think naturally you're going to start leaning into, okay, what onions can I kind of peel here to get to know these athletes, in order to not only feel more connected to them, but utilize their strengths in a positive way and help the team come together as a whole.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to some earlier podcasts when you talk about the intentionality of any type of situation a coach or an athlete has and how they perform. So again, it's the intentionality here of really getting to know your players and understanding that. From your perspective, do you know, is there somewhere coaches can go to get some like training, like through workshops or something to help them better deal with athletes of diverse backgrounds and to also be more inclusive with their team?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but it's the intentional effort behind it. Starting with a Google search, how to coach diverse athletes. And there's articles written about it. There's books that are written about it. I'm sure there's specific podcasts that are written about it. And we don't expect that you're going to become a diversity guru at the end of all
Right.
of this. You still, you're a coach, but 1% more knowledge is 100% more than zero. And so by just leaning in and learning a little bit here and there, just reading an article a week or a little abstract a day or something, just to kind of open your mind and fill the mind up on some different ideas and perspectives of how to view this, I think can really just go a long way. Because if that's what you're doing behind the scenes, that's going to show up to your athletes. An individual that's well intentioned and trying to educate themselves is going to come across positive and interactive and open to the athletes that he or she coaches.
And so when trying to build a inclusive team and getting everybody to get along, what are some bonding exercises a coach can work on or do with the team?
Yeah, I think it's going to vary by coach, team, the makeup of the team. It can be something as silly as, going and grabbing breakfast together, to something as orchestrated as, I remember Jim Tressel at Ohio State put on a basketball tournament, with all the players, and so now we're kind of doing something different, and that's really the one of the keys in creating a more interactive, open, team environment from a diversity standpoint is putting individuals together, mixing people up together in order to solve a unique challenge together. And when people are able to come together to solve a problem, they feel a lot more bonded as a result of it. So, anything that kind of has that feel to it, but it also doesn't need to be a problem to solve. I think another thing that Coach Tressel did a really good job of is we would switch around who we stayed with in the hotel. So there were times that I was with friends that I knew really well on the team, and then there was other times where I was with an offensive lineman that I had spoken 2 words with prior to that interaction. And so you're sharing the same room, you're going to have some type of talk and interaction. And again, that's another, kind of sneaky but intentional
Right.
way of getting these athletes to know one another that might not typically, get to know one another, or would have known one another.
Yeah, so I know talking to a couple school districts around here, a lot of schools have trouble attracting a minority coach or teacher. So what common barriers might school districts face in hiring these minority staff members?
Well, again, this goes back to some, larger social realities in this country, where you want to draw from, you need to sometimes draw from the community, and if the community doesn't have, individuals that match the criteria that you're seeking, it makes it challenging to do it. Well, why are there individuals that don't have this criteria? Well, sometimes the access that this individuals might want to get that criteria is thwarted. Well, why is it thwarted? Well, because of some of the social realities that we have in this country. But like, it, it becomes a challenge to navigate that unless there are deliberate decisions made to change some of those, social structures. Um, if you want to hire diverse engineers, for instance, in Hartville, Ohio, um, it's going to be hard to find a diverse engineer in Hartville, Ohio. So, those are the types of challenges for, again, a variety of reasons. So that's
And
one particular barrier, is just the access to individuals that have the criteria based on the community that you're in.
so if a school does hire a coach of a different diversity, how can the athletic director then best support that coach, especially if the school district has never had one before?
Yeah, well, these are, can be challenging initiatives depending on the community that you're in, um, but certainly supporting that coach just like you would support other coaches, and maybe even going above and beyond. So making sure that they have opportunities to meet and interact with key stakeholders, the athletic department, school boards, parents, obviously the athletes as well. Um, and especially if that individual is moving into a community. I think so often in our athletics, particularly at the high school level, these are individuals that already are in the community.
Mhm.
Even some big time head football coach hires are individuals that went to that school. It's not like they're out of state and they got
Right.
hired and they moved in the 15, 20 minutes away already. So if that's the case, and if you're deliberately hiring somebody in for some more diversity, getting them, taking the extra time to introduce them and onboard them to the community, the coffee shops, the restaurants, the insurance people, whatever it kind of is, to take that extra step.
Okay. And so when building a roster, how can a coach kind of ensure some inclusivity when selecting players or talent for the season? Or does it really just come down to what you said earlier? It's evaluating their skills and you're picking the 10 or 12 best players if it's a basketball team, or the 10 or 11 best players to play on the football team or start on the football team. You obviously need more than 11 players on a football team.
Right. Well, again, we're holding kind of two simultaneous things where we wish diversity was a non-issue, but it likely will never be a non-issue because there's differences and people have a tendency to recognize differences of all kinds. And so if the approach, though, is that we're going to celebrate diversity of all kinds, and we're going to have cultural sensitivity, we're going to share experiences with one another, we're going to educate the team on cultural differences, we're going to bring people in to speak to the team, we're going to play different types of music, we're going to have different types of foods, we're going to have different types of posters on the wall. All of these things send messages. And so if you create a container like that, then yes, when it comes down to the roster and the starting 11 or the starting 5 or the starting 9, whatever it might be, then the skill set has the opportunity to take precedence and not some other thing that isn't actually related to performance. And that's been the problem with oppression and of all types, whether it's gender oppression, ageism, racism, is you're using characteristics that are not based on performance as a way of making performance-based decisions, and that it shouldn't work that way. So if you create a container of open diversity, then the actual performance characteristics that matter, right? Can you throw? Can you catch? Can you jump? What's your scoring percentage? Can you lead? Those are the things that we're then making decisions based on.
All right. Is there anything else you want to add on this topic for coaches? I know we just scratched the surface with some of this stuff, and it's a much larger topic than, again, the 10 or 15 minutes we can spend breaking it down in each group. But is there anything else you'd like to add to maybe help our coaches out?
Yeah, again, like this is messy, and the hope is, I certainly recall being like impacted and having kind of emotional responses to conversations like this. And if you're a coach out there or a parent or an athlete or anybody, and you're listening to this and you're having a reaction, positive or negative, look into it and ask yourself why. I'm not here to make any judgments on people or say you have to be this way or anything like that. But if you have a particular response, ask yourself why and try to uncover that to the extent that you can. Because I think if you're able to ask yourself why, and then maybe it requires another, well, why do I think that way? Why do I think that way? You can start to uncover some interesting data that may help you and inform you of how you may want to approach the rest of your life in some ways. So don't push it down, don't disregard, ask yourself why, and maybe that can send us down some interesting pathways.
Great.